Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to participate in our event today. I'm really excited to see people here wanting to talk more about how we can explore and support the needs of the Kirkwood community. My name is Doug Mitter-Rotunda, and I'm the president of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District Board of Directors, and I'm a volunteer firefighter on the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. I'm joined tonight by our KMPD General Manager and KVD Fire Chief, Rick Ansell. We have a couple things that we're going to go through tonight in terms of our objectives. Our main objective here is to make sure people understand this ballot initiative that's going to be happening at the beginning of calendar year 26. And we're going to go help get people up to speed on this by going through a few topics. The first is going through the challenges facing KVFD. We'll talk about the recent history of how we got to where we are today and what's going to be happening in the next steps, of course. We'll talk about the different operational models and the costs of those models that the board has considered. We'll go through some commonly asked questions. We'll talk about what's called the benefit assessment methodology. This is how we allocate potential costs that there's going to be asked for in the ballot initiative to get across the community. And then we'll wrap up with Q&A and talk about what happens next. But I want to just say in summary that I can speak on behalf of the board and staff that we're just really grateful for the community's input along the way, especially these last couple of years, where the board and staff have worked diligently to research various options based on your feedback. And we're asking for you to consider funding an operational model that the board thinks balances our costs with the long-term viability of the department. And I will say that the board and staff do not take cost increases lightly. We recognize the costs of ownership in Kirkwood, and increasing that is a considerable ask to our community. And so we understand that that's an important thing to be putting in front of you. But our reality is that the status quo really won't last much longer. And ultimately, it's the Kirkwood community will have to decide via this ballot initiative in part how we're going to proceed on this topic. So thank you for all the people in the room tonight and the dozens that we have online for joining. So let me hand it over to Rick to talk about some of the challenges that the district has been facing.
So again, thanks for everybody for attending. We really appreciate your concerns and comments and of course interest in this. As I reported out in several occasions, our fire department's been challenged by multiple things. And one of them is just department leadership. I've been the chief for over 20 years now, on the department close to 34, 35 years. And since the beginning, we've always had one fire chief, and from time to time we've hired assistant chiefs and included captains. But this is not a really reliable thing. Having a qualified chief is really essential to running a fire department. And we do not have any volunteers on the fire department right now currently with the qualifications, the certifications, or experience to replace me. And it's certainly going to be a challenge to find somebody that would be willing to do this for free. But again, this is definitely one of the concerns is the leadership. And if we want to keep the department running, we really need to hire a qualified fire chief, essentially. My second point here is firefighter staffing. Our department aims to staff 2 firefighters 24/7, 365 days if it's a leap year. Over the years, staffing has ebbed and flowed, and we typically see an increase in the wintertime, but as in the summer and the elbow seasons, it can be challenging to ensure they have at least 2 people responding to calls. Again, thankfully today we have more shifts covered than we did a few years ago, and I think a lot of that has to do with us increasing the fire stipend, but that can change at any moment. And for example, just this week, we lost one of our captains who decided to find a work closer to his home on the west side. And so with that opportunity, he wasn't able to continue volunteer for the fire department. So again, staffing is always a challenge. Training. We currently train our volunteers to the best of our ability. We do bring in outside resources, of course, to assist us, but it can take months, if not years, to train a volunteer fully to be able to be proficient and to act safely during an emergency. Furthermore, only a few of our volunteers are actually EMTs at the basic level, and so your service that we provide can change depending on who responds to the call. And for example, Doug Metranda, one of our volunteers, he's gone through the Title 22 first aid course, the minimum requirements for a volunteer fire department, but he's not an EMT. And so if he gets a call to a heart attack call, yes, he can do a CPR AED, but if he wants to do any other care, medical type care, he's relying and or waiting on others to come in and help out. So just another example of like, we do the best we can with the people that show up, just like any other volunteer fire department, but it'd be really nice to have a more consistent response and level of service that we can provide the community. And then finally, financial challenges, as we discussed over the last several years. We've been funded through a few different mechanisms. About $65,000 is funded through a fire assessment, as you know, that was created in 1987, and that dollar amount has not changed since then. So this is why we're here today to discuss this. Until recently, approximately $250,000 was collected from property taxes, and the board decided that we should, again, do the best we can for the fire department. And so a few months ago, they increased that tax that we use for the fire department up to $430,000 by moving property taxes from water and wastewater toward the fire department. And then finally, historically, the KVFD 501c3 supported the department by funding equipment purchases through our fundraising activities like the summer festival. In years past, we had a Kirkwood 10K and of course assisted with the death ride. With the 501c3 being a nonprofit, it's a great way to build money for the department to buy essential things like SCBAs and fire engines, which we have. But in the last few years, we've been relying on that 501c3 to help support the fire department by covering the additional stipend costs, about $50,000 a year. So again, relying on the 501c3 to offset the operating costs is really not sustainable, and the increase in property taxes will help, but it's not fully fund options to solve leadership, staffing, and training challenges. Oops.
So before we go into the details of any of the proposals and specifically what you will be voting on in the new calendar year, I just know that some people have been following along this topic closely for many years. Others are going to be new to this topic. So I thought it'd be good to take a quick review of, I think, the diligent, consistent work we've been doing on this the last couple of years, just to make sure everyone's on the same page so we know where we're going. And I'll start the history with in 2023 that the district put forward what was called Measure E, as which was a special tax to try to raise money for the KVFD. It was a tax based on the number of parking spaces that each property has. It did not pass, and there were a few key takeaways that I think the board took away and learned from that process and initiative. Number one, that Measure E was structured so that it was going to authorize the board to be able to go out and negotiate operational models. So we didn't have anything concrete really in hand at that time, but we knew kind of ballpark of costs, and so we were asking you to authorize us to go out for up to over $1 million of a budget. And I think the community was pretty clear, and they said that they wanted more specifics on what that cost would be, what the operational would be, and that really over $1 million was really too much that I think most people wanted to pay for the service. Number two is that the benefit assessment was developed by KMPD staff and based on parking spaces, and I think it was pretty clear that that wasn't entirely received as the methodology of how to allocate the cost that everyone agreed with. And then I think third, the community wanted to know, how much will I pay for exactly, basically in summary, what will I pay for the exact level of service that I will get based on whatever methodology you approve? And we didn't have that at that time either. So based on this feedback, we began two initiatives in parallel. The first was exploring the organizational and staffing options. So we're considering both internally structuring a department and also contracting with our neighboring agencies. And then second, we hired a consultant who has done these sorts of benefit assessments. You'll hear us say benefit assessment. What we're saying there is how to allocate that cost that would take to fund a department across the community. So how to structure this payment for these fire services so each member of the community could understand it. And so with those two pieces of information in hand, it would allow us to tell you exactly what you would pay for the services and therefore, meeting these kind of objectives that we heard through the Measure E process. And that's where we are today, is that we now have these two pieces of information. And we did a survey a few months, like back in October, November, where you actually were able to see exactly how much you would pay for this level of service. So we're really trying to check off all the boxes that we heard from the community along the way. I'll also note, on the slide that you're looking at, we've engaged with lots of partners here. We'll talk about the operational models. The Board of Supervisors in Alpine County has looked at this. And so, this isn't signed contract that we have in hand, but this is way further along. We have kind of terms that we put together. We've got the Board of Supervisors a couple of times have looked at this and voted to continue these conversations. And, we've had really good conversations and really good partnership with the agencies that we've worked with, especially most recently Alpine County. Can you get the next slide for me, please? Sorry, thanks. So now we're going to talk about the operational models and the costs. And so I thought it would be good to summarize these options by looking at through the lens of the challenges that Rick talked about a few slides ago. So that's what's in kind of the left-hand column. And then what you're seeing through these columns are the different options that we've considered. The coloring of red, yellow, green here is completely subjective and is literally my own personal opinion, where I paid red to indicate the challenge really not being solved, green being solved, and then yellow is partially solved, somewhere in the middle. And I just wanted to make sure that we're trying to give you a sense of the options and the trade-offs that the board has considered to try to balance, how to fund a department, but at a reasonable cost. And so, as you go through the slide from left to right, one is the status quo. That's where we are today. And you can see that there the challenges that we've talked about. Because of some of the changes with water and wastewater, the funding option has actually changed in the last few months. That used to be red, and now it's become more green because we've allocated more property taxes through our water wastewater rate study that just got approved in the fall. We looked at internal options. There's one option that we had looked at in particular, and that was matching what we would originally had from Amador Fire Protection District, so match that apples to apples. And our reality is that we haven't gone down that path much longer, further, in part because in pretty much any scenario where we are hiring an internal department, a lot of the costs are the same in terms of contracting it out, but the benefit of a contracted service is that we wouldn't be paying the full carrying cost of a fire chief in that scenario. And so really, that is an option, but it's typically going to be a more expensive option than contracting it out with another agency. In terms of the four that you see from another agency, the one that's kind of left that says Eastern Alpine Fire Protection District, it has two red boxes in it. This is coming from the early conversations that we've had with Eastern Alpine to contract potentially just with a fire chief to operate more or less what we have today. But the consensus of the board was not to pursue the option because it didn't really solve the two other challenges of staffing and training. And so we wanted to focus our efforts on the board to find a cost-effective solution that has those challenges solved. And that's what the column next to it is with the green box and the 3 yellow is. That's what we've brought forward for your consideration, where we're looking to raise about $350,000 to have one firefighter EMT in Kirkwood 24/7, 365, supplemented by our volunteers that exist today. And to the right of that, you see two other options where we did talk to Amador Fire Protection District and Lake Valley Fire Protection District. Their suggestions and offers basically of what they would be comfortable providing to us are 3 firefighters 24/7, 365. And that higher level of service certainly comes at a higher cost. Okay. And the furthest to right is an option that we aren't considering right this moment, but it is a possibility, which is to divest. And at that point, we would potentially shut down the department and then rely on our neighboring agencies in Amador and Eastern Alpine to be able to provide really all services for emergency calls that come through Kirkwood. Okay. Want you to go next one?
And just stop right there. I think, let me know if you guys can see the slides. It sounds like the sharing wasn't working quite right. And so again, just let me know if you can see the slides.
I can see it, Rick.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. So some of the commonly asked questions that we've received historically is basically, how did the survey results come out? And so, thanks to the 300 plus of you who replied to the October survey on the proposal for the future of the fire and emergency service at Kirkwood, responding property owners, after seeing exactly what their assessment or cost would be, said yes by a 2-to-1 margin. In this slide is the survey results. Again, it was 216 who responded, said yes, 83 said no, and we had a 30% response rate for the residential properties total. With this level of support, KMPD board voted this month to proceed with Proposition 218, which California requires to approve a new tax assessment like this. Because Prop 218 compliant vote will be weighted based on assessment value, the votes from larger property owners like commercial customers will have much more weight than those of single family homeowners. This means that a high residential vote turnout will be crucial for proposals to succeed, depending on how commercial customers vote. So if you feel strongly or in favor of this proposal, it would be important to get your friends and neighbors to vote. And so also, again, if what's going to happen, these are some of the questions that we've answered in the past. I thought it would be important to bring it up here. What would happen to our ISO protection class rating? Without a fire department in Kirkwood, the rating would likely become worse. And possibly a paid department may improve it. Currently, our ISO rating and protection class, PPE class rating is 4. The other questions we receive is, can we just do emergency medical service and keep the volunteer fire department and just do medical? This would require, again, a proposal and interest from either American Legion in Amador County or in the El Dorado Medical Services, which is like Lake Valley and South Lake Tahoe. Sorry, let me take a step back here. I'm talking on the slide that's happening in advance of me, so I'm blowing it here on the webinar, but I'll continue with the slide and then I'll just cover the other one next. This is the slide I've been referencing. So again, if we wanted to bring in medical services, we would have to create a contract, and then we have to, like the Measuree, have to create a new special tax for the Kirkwood's properties to generate the required funding that would be needed to do that, and have that approved by the 2/3 of registered voters within Kirkwood Meadows PUD service area. And again, we'd still have an issue regarding volunteer firefighters, as I previously noted. What about the Barton Clinic? Well, Kirkwood does not have the capability to transport patients to the clinic, though they have improved and they've become a sort of a receiving facility at a limited level. But unfortunately, the Barton Clinic's not open year round, for example, after hours. So it's not a reliable resource for us. So we do appreciate the clinic and the services they can provide when they are open. What about incorporating Kirkwood into a city? Again, this would have to be a community-driven effort. We've talked about this before, and it would be a significant push and require probably a lot of money to get that done. But the district, the fire department wouldn't lead the charge for that. It'd have to be somebody from the community doing it. As I was talking, I kind of passed over this slide before, but what would happen if our ISO ratings would change? We kind of talked about that. Medical services, expand the clinic. So I think I covered both those slides, Doug. So let's move on to Ed Espinoza, the engineer who came up with the engineer's report. And so I'm going to move it to the next slide now, which is here. So Ed, why don't you take it away?
All right. Good evening. Can everybody hear me? All right. Good evening, Kirkwood community. It's great to be with you this evening. Happy holidays. My name is Ed Espinoza, managing principal with Francisco and Associates. Our firm specializes in the formation and administration of assessment districts and other special financing districts throughout the state. And we were brought on by KMPUD to move forward with the establishment of an assessment to fund fire protection services. As being discussed tonight, there is an imminent need for additional funding. So, back in March of this year, the board was presented with the engineer's report that's required under the Fire Suppression Act and Proposition 218 to establish an assessment. And ultimately, the engineer's report was approved by the board this fall. And so now we're moving forward with the next steps, which would be to actually conduct the Proposition 218 proceedings, which involves mailing notices and ballots to all property owners within the boundaries of KMPUD, within the boundaries of the district. So with that said, the engineer's report is the basis for the proposed assessment because it includes the budget that conveys what is to be funded through the annual assessments, and also the methodology that's to be used to assign the assessments to all the properties within KMPUD. So, how is the assessment methodology? How does it work, and how are these assessments determined? The proposed assessment for KMPUD is segregated into two components, those being the land component and the building component or the improved component. And the reason it's broken down into two components is because there's different types of benefit to property. So the land component, as you're seeing here on this slide, is represents the benefit to land, essentially the fact that the fire protection services protect land and therefore preserve property values. And the improved component or the building component it protects structures and safeguards people, right? And those are two different types of benefits. So for that reason, the proposed assessment is segregated into those two components. In terms of how the components are weighted, what we did is we evaluated property values within the boundaries of the district using county assessor data. And what that conveyed to us, and we were able to establish, is that 75% of the value of property within the boundaries of the district is attributed to the building component or the structures and the buildings, and 25% is attributed to the land value of the properties. And so the proposed assessment is weighted in that way. 75% is attributed to the building component, and 25% is assigned to the land component. The land component is applied to all properties within the district using a flat rate per lot square foot. So the bigger the parcel, the bigger the property, the larger the land component assessment is. And when it comes to the building component, what that assessment is driven by is land use type, and then also in the case of commercial or non-residential, commercial office, or industrial, building square footage. What was done on the building component side is everything is a ratio as compared to a single family home in terms of standard service population. So what I mean by standard service population is people per household. So generally speaking, in an average single family home, it's about 3 people per household. And that service population was used to establish what we refer to as equivalent dwelling units to establish proportionality amongst the other land use types. And that's what you're seeing here in this table is a comparison of the equivalent dwelling units by land use type. And when it comes to non-residential property, commercial, office, industrial, you'll see in the table that building square footage is the driving factor in terms of how how many equivalent dwelling units are assigned to each parcel. Multifamily or timeshares, the assessment is on a per unit basis. And you'll see condominiums pay on average about 75% that of a single family home because generally speaking, there's smaller building square footage and less people per household. The caveat here on this table is within the boundaries of the district, it became apparent that there are anomalies when it comes to the size of certain condominiums, meaning some condominiums are more similar in size to a typical single family home. And then we also ran into some anomalies when it comes to single family homes. Some are on the smaller side and more so closer to the average size of a condominium. And what we did to account for those anomalies is we established a baseline of 1,750 building square feet as the standard size for an average single family home. And so if you're a condominium that exceeds that threshold, you're proposed to pay the same rate as an average single family home. And also, if you're a smaller single family home, smaller than that average of 1,750 square feet, you're more similar to a condominium in size and in nature, and therefore you pay the average assessment for a condominium. So that's the only caveat on this table is the smaller single family homes, smaller than average pay an assessment that's more similar to a condominium. And if you're a larger condominium, you're proposed to pay an assessment that's more similar to the average single family home. Next slide, please. The second aspect of the assessment methodology is on the commercial side, it became apparent that uh, commercial property places a higher demand on fire protection services, especially during the peak seasons. And so we wanted to account for that in the benefit assessment methodology and essentially more heavily weight the assessment because of that impact. And so what was determined to quantify the impact is we obtained energy usage data, historical energy usage data, about a decade or so worth of energy data. And we evaluated that data peak season as compared to single family homes that are occupied year round. And we were able to, just looking at that comparison, establish and determine what the added impact is that commercial property has during peak season. And based on that analysis, an additional benefit factor of 2.3 was determined to be the impact that commercial properties have on fire protection and the higher demand on the services. And so embedded in the methodology is that weighted factor. Commercial and commercial office parcels have a factor of 2.3 applied to their assessment. So what you're seeing in the bullets here, the bottom two bullets of this slide are the assessment rates. So if we start at the second from the bottom bullet, you'll see the breakdown of the rates for residential parcels. The land component, again, is a flat rate per lot square foot, and that rate is 0.002 0.024 cents per lot, so per lot square foot. So it's a small number, but obviously the larger the square footage of your lot, that number starts to look larger. And then on the building component side of things, it's on a per EDU basis, and that rate is $348.17 per EDU. So that $348 rate is what the typical single family home pays for that building component. So the total assessment is the sum of the land component plus the building component. And so the land component will vary depending on lot size, and then the building component will vary depending if you are a condominium or a single family home or a timeshare. And then the last bullet that you see below is the breakdown of assessment rates for commercial and commercial office parcels. So starting with the land component, what that rate is the residential rate above multiplied by that factor of 2.3. And so that's what brings us to the 0.0046 cents per lot square foot. And then similarly on the building component side of things, it's that $348.17 multiplied by that 2.3 factor is what brings us to that $800.78 per EDU rate that you're seeing there on the slide. And again, the total assessment is the sum of the land component and the building component. So these rates that you're seeing here are in fiscal year 26, $27, meaning if the proposed assessment were to be approved by property owners, it would go into effect as of July 1st of 2026, and it would be the rate carries through June 30th of 2027, and then July 1st of 2027 the rate is subject to a CPI increase, as you're seeing here, that's described in the asterisk below. So every year, commencing with July 1st of 2027, the proposed assessment rates that you're seeing on this slide will go up by the applicable CPI that's published by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so that figure can vary from year to year depending on inflationary increases and the cost of maintenance and utilities and things like that. So that's an overview of the assessment methodology. As Rick described in the earlier slide, every property owner within the district will get a notice and ballot. The ballot will have the actual assessment for your property, specifically for your property, and each package will include a return envelope that, for convenience, it'll include prepaid postage, so property owners can return your ballot at no cost to the property owner. You send it back to the district, and the ballots will be tabulated following the public hearing. And the results of the ballot tabulation will be weighted based on the ballots returned, and each ballot is weighted by the proposed assessment. So if a single family home, as an example, has a proposed assessment of $500, and another property has a proposed assessment of $250, the single family home of $500, that return ballot will count 2 to 1 as compared to the $250 ballot. So it is a majority protest proceeding, but every ballot is not 1 to 1. It's based on the proposed assessment. So with that, I'll
Just to
turn it
clarify,
over.
you just said majority ballot. Just could you say what that means though? It's 50% of the weighted of the dollars weighted returned to us, right? It's 50% of what is returned, not the total out there, first of all, right? And
That's exactly it. That's
and it's
exactly it.
so if we had $1 million worth of, I mean, it's going to be $355,000 is the total dollar value of ballots going out. If we only got $100,000 worth of ballots back and 50,001 came back as a yes, that means that would be an approved ballot initiative. Is that correct, Ed?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And it's a majority protest proceeding. And the reason that distinction matters is because technically, if it's a tie, so in your example, if $100,000 worth of ballots come back and it's 50,000 yes and 50,000 no, and it's a tie, technically the board has authorization to proceed with approving the assessment. So it's a majority protest proceeding, meaning the board has the authority to proceed with the proposed assessment as long as the ballots returned weighted by the assessment amount, a majority does not oppose the assessment.
Thanks. Let's go to the next slide then. And you touched on a lot of these things, so you can help me with this. And just to clarify, anything that make sure we have the timing right on all of this is that our ballots will be mailed to each property owner at the address that's filed with their county for property taxes. And that will happen sometime in January. And then they have 45 days to get that back to us, right? And then we will have our hearing to tally the vote and tallying the votes on April 3rd.
That's exactly it. So the board will authorize the mailing of the notices and ballots at the board meeting on January 2nd. Then at that same meeting, they're setting the public hearing for April 3rd. Pursuant to Proposition 218, the notices and ballots must be mailed to all affected property owners a minimum of 45 days ahead of the April 3rd public hearing. And so for that reason, the ballots are anticipated to be mailed by end of January, but no later than early to mid-February. And then property owners have up until the night of the public hearing, the day of the public hearing, to return their ballot, change their ballot, or withdraw their ballot. So up through the close of the public input portion of the public hearing on April 3rd, that is the deadline to submit, withdraw, or change your ballot. And then following the close of the public hearing on April 3rd, the ballots will be tabulated, and the results can be declared following that tabulation.
I also just say, Ed, you touched on this a little bit in terms of your report, but we talked about this in great detail at board meetings probably 7 months ago. And I would say we appreciate again the feedback we received. The initial benefit assessment that Ed's team had designed hadn't accounted for some of the outliers you mentioned with the commercial and residentials. So we made adjustments, and this is where we ended up and voted on. So, just to be really clear on this, is like this is your first time hearing this about how this methodology is that we vetted this with the community through multiple meetings. We're not deciding on that. We're not changing the methodology at this point. It is what it is. The option that we're going forward with is the one that we have. This is the one full-time firefighter, EMT in Kirkwood, 24/7, 365, supported by Eastern Alpine, our fire chief, the fire chief there, and the county, Alpine County. That's what we've gone through all of this through lots of meetings over the last 24 months at least to go over these things. And so we're just trying to make sure everyone understands that we've gone through lots of processes. The feedback has been critical along the way. So we'll just say thank you to all of that. But these things, we're not vetting anything tonight, really. We're just telling you what we vetted over the last couple of years, essentially. So that when you get this ballot in sometime in January, February, this slide deck and what we presented to you is what we're talking about. This is the content here, and this is what you're going to say yes or no to. And so, what happens after that? That's why it depends. It's to be determined. If this is something that is approved by the community, then I imagine we'll continue those conversations with Alpine County to pursue that. If it's not, we'll go back to the spreadsheet that I showed before. There aren't that many options left at that point. And really it is maybe pursuing hiring a fire chief on its own, like going back to that as an option, which we still have those challenges, or we divest. And the reality is those are probably the only two options that we have left if this weren't to pass. And I can't tell you how the board will decide on that or anything, of course, but at this time, that's where we kind of are at this point. So with that, we've spoken a lot, giving you lots of information. If you're in the room, certainly raise your hand or whatever. If you're online, please raise your hand and get you off mute and ask any questions that you might have. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Navlo on the KMA HOA board, and I'm wondering do you have a plan for working with the HOAs in order to get the vote out?
Sure.
Is that
Yeah, I mean, in my role as the KMP board president, I've been emailing every HOA president
Right.
multiple times this past year of like, hey, there's this. Hey, we did a
Yeah, no, I'm
survey.
getting all that, but as far as any recommendations from you to the boards,
Yeah,
how what we should be doing to get our votes out, you know what I mean?
I mean, certainly, any comment, we have it in my HOA, we have a newsletter that,
Right, okay,
so like,
so
just-
there's nothing.
there's nothing like extraordinary that
Okay,
we.
another quick question I have
Sure.
is, are you able to track the votes that come in? Like, I've worked on a lot of
Sure.
school board type
Sure.
bonds and parcel tax and stuff like that. So you know when votes come in. So if an HOA was interested, we would know who hasn't voted yet, not how they voted, but if they hadn't voted yet, so that we could call or reach out to folks who hadn't voted.
That, I don't know, Ed, can you talk to that maybe?
Yeah. So in terms of just engagement with HOAs, is that the question?
The question is, well, like over the 45-day or 2 months that we were out there on this, if we don't, do we know, like, if the question is like, hey, no one in my HOA has voted, I want to talk to them. Do we track that in progress, or is at the public hearing, we just open all of them and we find out who and where, what voted?
Yeah, actually, by law, we can't open the
Oh, no, it's not how they
ballots.
voted, but would you know if the
Well,
ballot
if they
came
voted,
back?
yeah.
So like in any public election, I could be told who has voted, not how they voted,
Right,
but just who voted. So
Yeah, but sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
So I'm just saying, so like as an HOA board member, if I were to call you up, middle of March, said who hasn't voted or who has voted. And then I got a list of the, hopefully more than 50, but well, we have like 158 exact, but hopefully more than 50. But if I got a list of the 50 people who voted, then I know I could reach out to the other 100 and say, please vote. Not how they
Not how they
voted,
voted, yeah.
just whether they voted or not.
Sure. That's a great question. So the only way you would be able to know, or the district would be able to know who voted, is if they verbally told you. And the reason I say that is because Proposition 218 proceedings, as it relates to assessments, they're unique in their nature. So the way the packet is by law is you'll get a notice, a ballot, an outgoing envelope, a number 10 size outgoing envelope, and then you'll have a return envelope that's included in there. The return envelope is identical for all property owners. So when the district starts receiving all the return envelopes, it's impossible for the district to know who has returned an envelope because they're all going to look exactly the same. And also, by law, the none of the returned envelopes can be opened until the close of the public hearing, meaning until tabulation time. So the only way to know who's voted and who hasn't is public engagement and just calling the HOA boards or HOA representatives or individual stakeholders and asking and trusting that whatever they say is actually what they did. That's really the only way to know.
That's the only way. And so you're a public utility, so isn't this considered a public election or not?
I don't want, I'll let you frame
I don't
it.
know. I'd like to talk to you a little more offline about this. 'Cause, it'd be nice if we were able to help get the vote out, and it's
Sure.
much harder to do it when you don't know who's voted.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing that you are able to gauge is the volume, right? So
Yeah.
if there's a strong volume early on, you can tell that it's that property owners are heavily engaged and they're aware of what's.
But again, the volume does not necessarily dictate of ballots, of envelopes does not relate to how it's counted, just to make sure, again, everyone's very clear that if we had 100 things received, that doesn't matter. It's the dollar value that is enclosed with their vote, yes or no, because it's the weighted assessment, not the number of votes.
Exactly right. And as a matter of fact, we had a proceeding we did in the city of Clayton where we actually had more no ballots returned than yes, but the yes dollars, those ballots were higher dollar amounts, and they outweighed the no votes. So to your point, board member, it's the volume doesn't always necessarily tell the story, but it's a good indicator as far as at least engagement and um, response and all that. But you don't know until day of, really, results.
April 3rd is when we would know.
Yeah, April 3rd is the day. So um,
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone with the raising hands online?
Eric Raymond just raised his hand, so.
You don't unmute yourself. People are raising hands and then lowering their hands.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Eric, you're up.
Okay, great. Thanks. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
So can you give us a rough estimate for the voting amounts for residential properties versus commercial, assuming all the commercial ones vote against the proposition? How much of the residential will we need to capture? What percentage? It's answer that however you want.
Do you have that proportion?
sure, that's a great question. So I believe it's about 70-30, meaning 30% commercial versus 70% residential. But there are obviously a lot fewer commercial parcels, and therefore less property owners. And so, but that's about the breakdown in aggregate. It's about 70-30, 60s, 40s, that in that range.
Thank you.
Is that based on units or dollar amount?
That's
six-
that's based on
70-30.
dollar amount.
Benefit
Dollar amount.
received.
Great, thank you.
Dollar amount.
Yeah. Dollar amounts.
Go ahead.
I have questions, but I'm happy to go last if there's online folks stacking up.
So we have Pamela here in the audience. Why don't you
Should I
ask your
jump in?
question? No one else has got their hand up right now.
Okay, awesome. I have three questions. I hope that the answers are short. I think they are. You guys mentioned that the wastewater, the water and waste services overall budget is being shifted in order to make things more affordable. Can you speak to what services might suffer over there in the water, wastewater area in order to move those dollars? And it may be nothing, but I'm just wondering, is anything compromised because of that budget move?
It's no, because we're raised the rates commensurately to cover that cost.
Okay,
Right, there's a net, I'm not saying net neutral because it is an additional cost, but from their perspective, wastewater, they're like, what's the same dollars?
okay,
But from you as an owner, now you are paying more to cover that same budget because we're using
Right.
fewer of the property taxes dollars to fund that service.
Got
For the perspective, and some people who've heard me talk about this before, I call it X plus Y minus Z, right? It's whatever Alpine County has plus our operational costs minus Z, which is how much property tax do we put towards this? And initially it was a couple 100,000, and now we've boosted up to 480. So that 335 that we're total asking for this ballot initiative is lower because if you look back at that slide, it was $800 some $1,000, but we're taking that down 480 to make it more affordable. Because if we didn't if the wastewater rates stayed with the property taxes, then this initiative would be $500,000, give or take, whatever.
got it.
Instead of the 355, sorry, that it is today, it would have been over $500,000. And so
Right.
that's what the board said, look, this is how we're going to move those dollars that we have some flexibility with. And yes, the cost is increasing rates for water wastewater.
Okay, cool. Thanks for making me do algebra. I always feel like I should introduce myself, Pamela Hyde, up on Dangberg, West Meadow. My second question was, is that what is how much has the San Francisco Bay Area CPI tended to increase each year? What is the approximate on that? How does that trend?
Sure,
I
that
mean, it was.
Tell you off
it
the
was
top of my head that
massive.
Can our guy answer that?
Yeah, and I mean, it was massive a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like it was, and then it was a couple percent, right?
Okay,
yeah, it's a great. So obviously, the last handful of years, inflation has been different, right? And we did an analysis a couple years back. We did a 10-year average before I think up through 2023 or so, and the 10-year average was about 3%. So with that said, we definitely have had years in recently of 5%. We had one year I think that was higher than that, where the CPI was 7 or so. But the 10-year average is in the 3%, probably closer to 3.5. With all the higher figures that have come in recently.
great, that's helpful. Final question, have has the board had discussions with KMR, Vale? And do we have a sense of, or, does this answer some of the kinds of things that maybe they didn't feel great about with Measure E? So it might be, sure, yes.
So I'll
Yeah,
answer that. So Crooked Mountain Resort, so Ricky Newberry, the general manager of Crooked Mountain Resort, and I have been in close contact for the time that he's been the general manager on this topic, and I really appreciate him and his team for being involved in this. In fact, Ricky helped get the Lake Valley introduction. In that, one of the questions he had was early in the stages, like the Amador proposal in particular. He said, "Hey, have we talked to Lake Valley?" And we tried to, but he knew someone personally there, and he's been actively involved. They run the Barton Clinic. He's talked a lot about medical. So I think Ricky and his team have been really engaged in this. We've talked very frequently about this. So I would like to say, and hopefully Ricky would agree with me if he were sitting here next to me, that he knows what's going on and he knows what is happening here. How Crooked Mountain Resort will vote on this, I do not know. I have asked him specifically, the supervisors asked him this, Alpine County supervisors asked him when his team was at a meeting a couple months ago. Look, he's managing a budget and he's trying to figure out what makes sense for the resort. And I don't know how that exactly, but all I can say is that he's been really engaged and his team is very engaged. They know what's going on, and I appreciate the partnership throughout the process, no matter what ends up happening. Of course, I think it's been a really good conversation that we've had. So great. That's all I can really say to that.
Yeah, and that's great. That's fantastic. That's a lot.
And I know his staff is here tonight listening, and like I emailed him the other day, just reminding him of this. Like, it's been a really good process, but I can't tell you how that will vote. Sounds good. Couple other things that other things that I've been asked that I think might be worth mentioning too. The intention of the proposal with Alpine County is that it's like a time and materials. So that $355,000 and that's budget isn't a fixed number. We're not intending on saying in our initial conversations with them wasn't like, all right, here's whatever number of dollars per year, and just here's it is. They will send us invoices, so the numbers could fluctuate. So it could, but this is what we're budgeting as numbers that are in that. If you look closely at our details, there's a contingency built into this as well. So we have some buffer. We have aspects into this that we've built into this, but it is supposed to be time and materials. And Ed, help me on this, because this is a question that I've heard is, we can authorize, if the community were to vote yes on this, we get authorized to fund up to the amount that was in the ballot. So the $355,000, suppose in the first year, we're still ramping up with the number of firefighters that we've hired, we can authorize fewer than those dollars in a given year. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. What's being approved, or what property owners are being asked to approve through the noticing and balloting that's about to be mailed, is approving the maximum assessment rates. So in any given fiscal year, whether it be this upcoming fiscal year or 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, the board can elect to assess below whatever the applicable maximum rate is, because the maximum rate will automatically go up by CPI every year. So the maximum rate goes up by CPI, but in any given fiscal year, the board can elect to assess below. So to answer your question, board member, yes, you can assess below in any given fiscal year.
Right. And then furthermore, in our conversations with Alpine County, I think, we both want to make sure that we're both covered by this as well, right? So if for whatever reason this isn't working, we could stop. And because of that, we can always assess lower than whatever potentially got approved. It's not like we're in perpetuity asking for this money if we're not providing this service. Like we have ways of them backing out. And so again, my hope and my expectation, and I think we've got great partners who are sitting in this room that I'm looking at right now. I expect this to work if we were to go this route. But in either side, like if we're finding that that the service that we're getting isn't matching what we agreed to in our contract or whatever, that's what we are anticipating writing into these agreements that we will have lawyers review from both sides and making sure this would work. But I want to make sure everyone understands, like, this isn't in perpetuity. We're taking this max cap every year. It could change, it could be lower, and it could terminate. And if it's not, that's a possibility as well. But I have full confidence given the conversations that I've been having with Alpine County in the last 8 months on this topic, that we can make this work if we were to go this route. But some other common things that I've been asked over the last many months. Okay.
I don't see any other hands right now, so.
Okay, why don't you go to the next slide then, Rick here. So the last slide here just has contact information. So it has my email address, it has Rick's email address, info KMPD. You're welcome to reach out to Rick or I. We're going to post these materials. There's a website that we have that's called the Future KMPD or KVFD, I'm sorry, where, links to the engineer's report, all the MOU that we've drafted with, the kind of the general terms that we've worked on are all there. Survey results, things like that are all out there. So we want to make sure everyone's well informed. If you have any questions, please contact us.
Looks like Sandy just raised her hand.
Oh, Sandy,
See if you
thank
get
you.
her in.
Got you just in 1 second, Sandy.
Come on, computer.
I think it's on the other page screen. That's fine.
Okay,
I think it's on the other screens.
here we go. Here we go. Maybe we get Sandy here.
Did you raise your hand?
I'm not seeing it.
She did.
She did, we saw it.
Oh, there it is.
There it is. Don't worry.
Hi, Sandy. We see you.
Go ahead, Sandy. Get unmute yourself.
Hey, everybody. I just want to thank you for the presentation and taking the time to explain all this. I fully support it, and I hope that we can get everyone to vote for it and pass it so that we can have a safe environment to live, not just for fire, but also for medical protection.
Good.
Thank you again. Bye.
Thanks, Sandy.
Thanks, Sandy.
Yeah, and I would just say, I'll wrap up by saying thank you. I can't emphasize enough. There have been so many people that have worked on this from the board of directors many years ago before me. This past year, John Schroeder and I have been the ones been tasked with mostly working with Alpine County. Terry Woodrow, Board of Supervisors, really got the ball rolling with Alpine County. Ricky again for the introduction to Lake Valley. Rick, you worked the Amador side of things over there. A lot of people have been working really hard on this. Paul and Tom, you always been lots of phone calls, staff in Alpine County. We've been trying to make something happen, but at the end of the day, it's up to you. It's up to everyone on the phone call here. It's your choice. The board is trying to get in front of you what we think is the most cost-effective option that has a viable long-term solution for us. It's up to everyone on the call how we proceed, and we laid out the options of what will happen, yes or no. So, appreciate your feedback along the way. It's been a journey to get here. I'm personally just excited that we have the information. We listened to you at Measure E. I feel like we've checked off the boxes to get you what you need to know to make an informed decision, and that we're at that time to make that decision. So it's an exciting time for Kirkwood, for our community. And I just want to say thank you all for joining us tonight and for all the conversations we've had along the way. And thank you in advance for submitting your vote. So good night. Reach out if you have any questions.
And we will be posting the slide deck, and I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning here, but we'll post the slide deck, all the information, as well as we'll be discussing this at our next board meeting, which will be this Friday at 2 p.m.
Which we always invite people to come and welcome people to participate. So
But again, thank you.
thanks, everyone. Good night.
So you're in this now,
I know it's kind of young. Yeah.
right? Hello.
Hi.
I'm Pamela Hyde. I'm Becker.
Yeah.
It's a spot for you. Hi.
Wasn't a lot.